by that from my very first day in this country. Plenty of very skilled civil servants and so forth. And they derive, I think, a great deal of pride, as they should, on some of these national indicators and the progress that we've seen on maternal and child mortality or school enrollment. Where it gets more complicated, and they understand this, but where it gets much more complicated is about looking under these numbers and trying to find really the extent to which this rapid, this pretty impressive progress has been shared reasonably equitably by different communities. And here the story is much less positive for Nepal, and we need to talk about that if we're going to talk about the MDGs and if we're going to make them relevant to Nepal's transition process. So we celebrated, for example, just a few minutes ago, the fact that Nepal is on track, more or less, for halving those people living in extreme poverty by 2015. The fact of the matter is that actually, for let's say the Brahmin Chetri community, they've already made it to 2015 in terms of halving the members of that community that are living on less than $1.25. But if we look at the Muslim community, they haven't even started that journey. 6% so far over 1990. That pattern of people that seem to be essentially predetermined on their development trajectory by an accident of birth, of where they might live, or their gender, or their ethnic group, or caste group, and so forth, that pattern replicates itself. I can quote numbers to you on education levels, on child mortality, the under fives, the Dalits are twice the level of Mewar community in terms of how many kids are not making it to the age of 5. I can quote you numbers on income levels and so forth and so on. On that level, that is an enormously difficult issue. It's about equity, it's about inequality and different policies, and it's very political. And here there are certainly some policy prescriptions that we can talk about in terms of tax processes, about increasing investment in agriculture and the rural areas and so forth. But it's also a heavily political question. It requires leadership from the top. You can have great civil servants that have got great policy prescriptions and are motivated and so forth, but if you don't have the necessary leadership and, let's say, the necessary political consensus for a government to pursue an issue like school enrollment quality or getting income levels increased in the Muslim community or girls' enrollment rates in the Muslim community up, if you don't have governments and leaders that are prepared to allow that, to work on that over a 10, 15-year horizon, that issue has got to survive the electoral cycle because it's going to require really long-term structural effort. And that discussion, unfortunately, we don't have very often yet in my 18 months. I'm still looking for people to talk to me about a long-term plan on hunger, a long-term plan on retention of girls in primary schools.
How important is political stability in terms of achieving such mammoth goals?
It's hugely important, but it's possible if there's a strong enough consensus amongst political leaders. And this was the intention of the Millennium Development Goals, really. When everyone signed up in the year 2000, there was an understanding that we're going to take a few very precious, very fundamental goals, and we're going to take them out of the fray of politics, not just in Nepal, but the global sort of north-south debates, arguments over resources, arguments over good governance, whatever. We're going to take a few fundamentals out of the backward and forth and the brutal sort of political stuff, and we're going to focus on these and make sure that we really achieve them by 2015. They will outlive all of us that are signatories as political leaders, except for the odd dictator. Our successors will get the credit when we hit 2015, but they're so profound, it is so right that these be achieved, that they need to be taken and put in a separate space, if you will. So that political stability is very important for development generally. It's very important for investment. It's very important to get policies and so forth. But the argument, I think, here is also that these few issues need to somehow be elevated above the day-to-day politics. And that was the deal.
That lacks.
That was the deal of the end.
Does that lack in Nepal?
There isn't enough focus on these issues in Nepal. The political leaders are certainly not sufficiently preoccupied with these issues to give it the leadership that it requires. If we ask ourselves honestly, where is the political capital being invested by political leaders, hunger comes fairly low down the list, and it deserves to be rapidly upgraded to higher status.
In order to achieve or inch towards achieving the goals by 2015, well, Nepal embarked on the second phase of democracy a couple of years ago, and politically we were passing through a cliche called transition. Do you think the issues that you mentioned in the conversation today, that the community divide and the progress is made by individual communities vary from here to here? And do you think this awareness that has come into the Nepalese life after the second phase of democracy in Nepal helping towards achieving goals, or it has confused the general public in Nepal?
Well, I look at the Comprehensive Peace Agreement as a statement of a consensus statement by Nepalis on what needs to change for Nepal to be peaceful and prosperous going forward. So I have a tremendous faith in that document and in the spirit that it articulates on behalf of all Nepalis. And these issues of equity and justice are very much embedded in that document. So I think it's tremendously helpful. If I've understood your question right, Bhushan, I think that we have a convergence in a sense. These issues of making sure that we aren't satisfied with simply a national number on poverty, but we are prepared, we the government, we the Nepali politicians, we the development partners of Nepal, we're prepared to open up the Pandora's box perhaps and look inside under that number to see whether the benefits of this progress has been shared reasonably equitably. I think that is now allowed, that is now permitted, that is now at centre stage of this transition. It's articulated in the peace agreement, it's part of the vision behind the new constitution writing process. So I think we have a tremendous convergence, but also an appreciation. I think we all have to have an appreciation of the scale of the challenge, because Nepal is really, so I like to say, performing open heart surgery on itself in terms of tackling all these issues, pretty much simultaneously. And that's open heart surgery is a high risk undertaking in any context.
Brought to you by Jagadamba Steels, Nepal's #1 steel company. सर्वाधिक विश्वासिलो जगदम्बा सिमेन्ट हो नेपालीहरूको. Real with root power, Maruti Cement. हामी बनाउँछौं नेपाललाई.
Healthy, yummy chayo. सबैजना हेर यहाँ मस्तीको धुममा छ. पाएन केही धेरै छ मिठो यम यम. Yummy, yum, yum. Experience the mouth-watering, delicious taste of the most popular noodles in Asia Pacific. IVI fortified with vitamins and minerals. Yummy, yum, yum.
मेरो style, मेरो स्वास्थ्य दाँत. मेरो style, म दाँतको दुख्दा डाबर रेड
यसमा छ वाङ अथवा पुदिना, जसले सबै प्रब्लम्सलाई गर्छ आउट.
मेरो style,
मेरो रिकमेन्डेसन. मनको कुरा तिमी कसरी भन्छौ? कपालले मोहनी लगाइदियो कपालले. कसरी घटिलो भन्छौ यसरी? कपालले लुकी किन बसेको कि तोरीको चिप कपालदेखि डराएको?
साधारण तोरीको तेल ल्याउनुहोस् डाबर आउँदा अमलाको पोषणले दिन्छ ट्रिपल फाइदा, जसले दिन्छ धेरै लामो, धेरै बलियो र धेरै सुन्दर कपाल.
असली अमला डाबर